Yeah, I'm Paul Mealor, I'm a composer, and also I'm Professor of Music at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. Absolutely, William Matthias, the great Welsh composer, perhaps the greatest Welsh composer, I was very lucky that I lived not far from him down the road, and he just retired as Professor of Music. He retired early because he was very ill, and so he was looking for a project, and I was it, and so at the age of 12, I started having lessons with him, and I was his only private student, I think, that he ever had. And for me it was amazing because I learned harmony and counterpoint and all the things that are important, which you hate learning, you know, where it's like no one wants to learn all that stuff. But actually the interesting thing for me was sitting there and seeing him compose as well, and hearing his music. What I loved about William's music is it was him. You know, it was the joyous man that was him. My music doesn't sound like his at all, but what I found in his music a joy, which I've tried to emulate in my own way. Oh, absolutely. I mean, what I loved about William is he believed in teaching the art, which is not just the practicalities, which we tend now to be so afraid of teaching. We teach only what is syllabus related. What I loved about William's lessons, because it was nothing to do with a course or anything, he taught me life. You know, he taught me. So when we were studying music, he said you can't set words to music unless you know the poetry. So let's go to the poetry. So then we analyse the poetry. So you start breaking away a Christina Rossetti poem to find out what made her tick, and then that links into your work as a composer to inspire you. And so it was an all-round type of teaching which we don't really do now. Well, we do in Scotland, because that's what I teach when I teach composition. We teach everything, the philosophy behind it, the literature, the great works of art which have inspired composers and performers. All of these things link in to create the music. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. I think it's the most important thing really in the world for ensembles to embrace living music, because we can all sing the great works of Bach and Handel and all these people, but actually what's important to people that are singing now is music that's being written now, and so that the Auckland Youth Choir takes and adopts a composer for a period of time to work and sing with the group and then write for the group and then perform it, I think is crucial to what music is. Music isn't a kind of an archaic thing. It is something that is alive, and each generation and each composer speaks to that generation. I think there's nothing more inspiring for me as a singer to sing music by someone that's still alive and hear their take on the world and see if I agree with it or disagree with it or find something in it that, and I think particularly in this day and age where the arts, particularly, I don't know if it's like in New Zealand, but in the UK and the US it's being squeezed more and more, and people don't see the value in it because they don't really understand what life's all about until the end, and then it's too late for them. And so for us it's important to support living music all the time, because it is our culture. It is the future of our culture. Well, the funniest thing is I blame education for destroying youth engagement with the arts, because I mean I'm very lucky enough to have quite a large family, and so I have a great nephew and a great niece, who are my niece's children, and the amazing thing is that they want to make music. So my nephew, Joshua, who's 2, wants to bang the drum, he wants to play the piano, he wants to create, he wants to paint, he wants to do stuff, instinctively wants to do it, without being taught anything. So what we do is we take, in our education system in the West, we take that and then we destroy it. And so it's not surprising that people then lose that beautiful creativity. What we should be doing, I think what people are waking up to now, is that actually that innate sense of wanting to communicate in whichever way we can is actually really part of the human soul. And so many places now in the UK and the US, and I'm sure here in Australia, are beginning to change the way we think about education and actually support that. So youth engagement with the arts is essential. It's essential for the human being. We know with the studies that we've seen in education that those people who do music or art do better at everything else. I mean, that is now fact. It's no longer debated. And so why aren't we celebrating this in our education system? That's a good one. That's a tricky one. The idea of what is one communicating to each generation is a fascinating one. In essence, the beauty of music is that it is not direct. When you start to define music, and is it an art, is it a science, is it a language? Well, it communicates a bit like a language, but it isn't. It communicates a bit like a science, but it isn't. It communicates a bit like an art, but it's not like any other art form, because it doesn't actually exist. It exists in the space between what you think and what's written. What's written isn't the music, what you think isn't the music, it's what happens in between. And so it's ephemeral. It's a bit like prayer, it kind of doesn't exist. So, in essence, what you're trying to communicate is not something that's hard-edged, like a meaning. What I'm not trying to communicate. For example, I write a lot of sacred music, but I don't expect someone to suddenly become a Christian in the middle of it. It makes no difference to me whether they have that. What I'm trying to communicate is the idea of the human spirit, or the idea of the human soul, if that's the right word, wanting to speak out into the darkness, wanting to reach out, like Shakespeare said, in a rather sexist terms, a man's reach must exceed his grasp. So it's like we're trying to reach out into what makes things really matter. And so what I'm trying to communicate are those things. And so it's not important to me that you really understand that Mary Magdalene is at the foot of the cross crying. What's important to me is you understand the idea that a human being can feel so strongly about another in that way. That's all really that you try to communicate. And to try and get that which has touched me so much, touch others. And if the actual words themselves and those people matter to people, then great. But it doesn't have to be that. It's the emotion, it's the spirit of it that I think I want to try and communicate.